Hi, I'm Robert Osborne, and welcome. Good to have you here. From now until December 9th on Monday nights in prime time, TCM is premiering chapters in the 15-part documentary series created by film historian Mark Cousins called The Story of Film and Odyssey. And quite an odyssey it is. Since September 2nd, we've been seeing Mark Cousins' view of the early days of movie making, both in Hollywood and around the world. And tonight, sound enters the picture, literally. And joining me again tonight, as he has been and will be every Monday, to introduce each episode of the series is the man who made it, Mark Cousins. Welcome again, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Now, we've been through the apex of silent filmmaking. Now sound enters the picture. So movie making, kind of at least from Hollywood's standpoint, started from the beginning again. How did that affect everybody worldwide?
It's like the film became imprisoned for a while. Film at the end of the 20s had been so liberated, the camera could swoop and move, and then suddenly it had to sit beside the microphone.
Right.
And that was a real grounding for cinema. But also, sound brought so many new things to the movies that in those days people began to understand quite quickly. So, for example, that social sense. If we looked at John Gilbert or Greta Garbo, we didn't know where they came from in the world, but suddenly we heard accents. And you could, when you looked at movie stars, you got more sense of the reality of their lives, which was interesting. But also more exciting than that, people realized that sound wasn't only realistic. It could be poetic, it could be expressive. And so you could use sound to make drama, to add to a sense of the magic of a moment. You could use sound to undercut the image, all sorts of new things. This was being done particularly in France, but in North America by the great Ruben Mamoulian, etc. So sound, like any tool, quickly became expressive. And the big question is, how do we use it creatively?
So you go into in the series now about what happened worldwide with all of that, not just in Hollywood.
Yes.
Was that a big deal? I assume it was, from what I know of it, that now they also had to adjust to different voices, you know, in other countries. It wasn't as universal as it had been.
No. When sound came along, film stopped becoming such a universal language. This was a real problem for the business model. You couldn't make a film in Hollywood and then export it around the world because people wouldn't understand what they were saying. So people had to make more visual films, or famously they would make the same film twice or three times with an English-speaking actor, right, and a German and a Russian, etc. But that became a bit mechanical and clunky. So it created all sorts of new challenges. But it meant what was really good is if you were sitting in Germany, if you were sitting in Tokyo, Japan, you had the chance really to make films about your societies, your countries, your people, your concerns for the first time properly, because you weren't importing so much Hollywood stuff. So this new era of sound allowed more indigenous local filmmakers to get a go and get a foot on the rung of the filmmaking ladder, which was great. So it stimulated production around the world.
So we also have color entering the picture during this era.
Color.
And we also have a war entering the picture.
Absolutely.
You know, and changing a lot of things, also bringing a lot of people to Hollywood from Europe that weren't there before.
Absolutely.
So let's have a look. Very exciting. Here it is, and its U.S. television debut, Chapter 4, in the Story of Film and Odyssey, subtitled The 1930s, the Great American Movie Genres, and the Brilliance of European Film. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Every Monday since September 2nd in primetime on TCM, we've been premiering a new chapter in the 15-part documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. Well, tonight we have the 5th installment, which brings us up to the post-World War II movies of the 1940s. And back with me, as he has been each week, is the writer, director, and narrator of the series, Mark Cousins. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Interesting era this is.
Yeah.
The 1940s and the war going on in Europe and the emergence of people like Orson Welles and Billy Wilder and all that. Is this a favorite era of yours?
I think this is a great era.
Yeah.
You know, you can see cinema around the world.
Era.
Complicated. You could say that cinema before this had an element of fantasy about it, a pure escapism, you know. But here, in this period, 1939 onwards, movies darken visually and morally. So we start to see all these great film noirs, you know, where there are loads of shadows, you know, and flawed heroes and tragic endings. And
beginning of film noir.
Film noir, and Orson Welles comes along and shows us that movies don't only have to have shallow focus, you can have really, really deep focus, you know, and
show ceilings
and things like that. And this combination of visual and moral darkness is really exciting. But if you go to Europe, where of course, which was in ruins in 1945, you come across Italian neorealism, and it completely
which changed the course of history.
Changed the course of movie history. Suddenly, they had this word de-dramatized. You know, Hollywood had been about drama, hadn't it? It had been excitement. But the Italians said, no, let's de-dramatize. Let's make films about everyday life. A guy who gets his bike stolen, a children who shine shoes, etc.
But weren't they also kind of forced into that? Because they didn't have sets. They didn't have money to build, you know, sound stages and do all that. They had to go out in the street and do it. But
it's
in
like,
doing
what do we have? What do we have? We've got a simple camera. We've got no lights.
In doing that, they created this whole new art form and changed the course of our movies in Hollywood as well.
And what they decided was that every ordinary life is interesting. You know, Alfred Hitchcock famously said cinema is life with the boring bits left out. And they said, well, no. What you think is boring, an ordinary woman cooking food or something, if you look carefully enough, this is exciting. This is real life. This is drama as well. So that was new, and that challenged the conventional way of storytelling. So it's filmmakers, especially in Hollywood, had to up their game. Alfred Hitchcock's made a film like Wrong Man, far more serious than what he had done before. So even filmmakers who hadn't been in World War II responded to these changes and made less, you could say, frivolous pictures as a result.
Was there one person more than any other, in your opinion, who was the most influential on this era?
I think you have to mention Billy Wilder here. He's a European, he comes to the US. He's a cynic anyway, in the best sense. He doesn't believe in the hero exactly, you know, he believes in the anti-hero, but he's such a brilliant technician that he starts to make films that have got a European sensibility, but with all the Hollywood equipment.
Right, and he knew how to entertain.
He knew how to
entertain, time.
Yeah, and you make Double Indemnity, you make Sunset Boulevard. I remember seeing Double Indemnity when I was a boy and just loved its piercing, triple distilled, like espresso hit. Whew. Here was something that I hadn't seen before. And so what Billy Wilder, I think, is really central to this period. But then if you look at the end of this period, in Britain, you get a film like The Third Man, which has got it tells you so much of 1940s cinema. It's quite morally serious. It's visually very deep, that famous ending where a person walks like this towards the camera. And it's sort of like a focal point. It tells you a lot about the 1940s, a great era.
Well, let's take a look. Here's the TCM premiere of the 5th installment in the documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey, subtitled The Devastation of War and a New Movie Language. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Every Monday in prime time since September 2nd here on TCM, we premiered a new chapter in the documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey, a series which focuses not just on movies of Hollywood, but filmmaking all around the world. And tonight the subject is what was happening on the international film front in the 1950s. Back to discuss this next chapter is the man who created, wrote, directed, and narrates the documentary series, film historian Mark Cousins. And first I have to, for those who haven't been with us from the very beginning, have to kind of restate your credentials in doing this. You are a filmmaker from?
Filmmaker from Ireland, living in Scotland. Yeah, I fell in love with movies as a child. Then I studied film history and art history and started making documentaries. But I felt that I had a head full of cinema, and I wrote some books. I think I've done 5 books on movie history, etc.
Including one called The Story of Film.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And in that book, I wanted to write not about showbiz, not about box office, not even about Oscars, just about innovation in cinema. Who were the innovators? And that's what I did.
And you and another fellow went out on your own and kind of got the financing to do this and traveled all over the world
all
doing
over the
interviews.
world, in West Africa and Iran and China and Scandinavia, all over North America, just sort of globe-trotting. And it was sort of like making a road movie about the history of cinema. And we visited the famous studios where many films were made, the grave sites of some of the great filmmakers. I remember going to Buster Keaton's grave and laying flowers on his grave, and walking from Billy Wilder's grave to William Wyler's grave, etc. So it was a labor of love.
Yeah. So let's talk about this next chapter, what we're about to see.
Yes. We're going to the 1950s now. This was a time of great social change, as you know. Teenagers. Africa was decolonizing. Rock and roll was coming along. And cinema, you could say, had maybe been slightly behind the times. You know, it was wonderful, but we were slightly in the era of a kind of Doris Day, a sort of slightly optimistic...
Well, because Hollywood is still dominating all this at this point, right?
Yes.
But the world is now becoming really a part of all of this sort of stuff.
And if you look at world cinema in the 1950s, you notice there was one style that dominated. It was like the melodrama. The melodrama, as you know, is like a pressure cooker, which is full of pent-up emotions. And that really reflected the pent-up emotions around the world. So if you go to Egypt, you find the melodrama. If you go to India, you find the melodrama. Japan. And of course, if you come here to America, you get James Dean. You get those actor studio pictures coming out of New York City, etc. So all around the world, there was this cinema bursting at the seams.
And here you also had television entering the scene, competing with films.
Yeah.
So that's throwing a whole thing into the picture.
The audiences are being drawn to TV. Television is live, so it's got that nervy energy. As you know, Marty, the original TV program, was live. Rod Steiger walked out on the streets in New York the next day, and people were recognizing him from TV last night. That kind of vitality, that kind of spark, Hollywood had lost a little bit. It had to get its mojo back, and of course it did, as we discover it does. But Hollywood was not going to lose the audience. It had to hold on to the audience, so it had to modernize.
Yeah, and you have that thing about the House Un-American Activities Committee coming up, and you also got the, again, that terrific competition from television, and you've got... there's so much going on, widescreen, everything like that.
A time of real flux.
Of chaos, actually. No one knew where it was going.
And nobody knew less than Hollywood at this moment. Sometimes Hollywood led the way in the 20s, and in other times, not at this point. It was behind the curve.
Yeah, such an interesting time. Let's have a look. Here making its U.S. television debut, Chapter 6 of the story of film and Odyssey, subtitled The Swollen Story, World Cinema Bursting at the Seams.